A round of applause for Alfonso. Without him, none of this would be possible. 1 second while with... This, which one? Ah, okay, great. Well, thank you for letting me have a few more minutes, because honestly, I think this time I've given myself a lot of talks, but this one was a very important challenge, not only because of the complexity of unraveling a hack like the one we're about to see, but to tell you about it in just 30 minutes. Tell me. 10 more minutes, great. I'll lead it for sure. It's blinking here, I don't know. You can see you're blinking there too. If you don't, I unplug and plug it back in. In the end, Kyberswap did it, okay? It went through its valley of death. It went for a long time. Without presentation mode. And I'm just going to present the full screen. And let's keep our fingers crossed. Okay, it looks good here, doesn't it? Well, that's what I was saying. Let me just go through here again real quick, okay? I don't know how I'm doing on time. Well, I've already eaten everything that you had given me in addition. Well, the news was that shocking, wasn't it? There's a glitch, an infinite money vulnerability. It's the most sophisticated attack known in the history of all decentralized finance. And well, because the attack before was done with a very important part, right? What I was saying, we are going to see this multidisciplinary part, because it is so important now when working, for example, on the blockchain issue, to also know a lot about finance and decentralized finance. That is, it is not enough just to know how to exploit vulnerabilities or to know only about security. We have to know security applied to finance, okay? Let's look at the level of sophistication and see why there are these incentives for white hats. Okay, as I was saying, well, I've been working in security for many years. And, well, I had the opportunity to start my own startup, fail with it, learn along the way, and, well, dedicate myself professionally. I'm currently working at Polygon, the security team, which, as you know, is a company that is in the top 3 after Bitcoin and Ethereum, according to the Fortune Crypto 40 index. And, well, capitalized at $10 billion, as you can imagine. Security for them is very important. And also, well, because it is customary to give talks at events a little more underground within the crypto environment, which are events, international events. Well, the winding road I'm going to give you is in April, okay? They had this responsible disclosure, this book bounty report. They paid the white hat $1 million, which at the end of the day, realized that's only 1% of the money that was at risk, okay? Which was 100 million. And that action, I mean, going down from 100 million to 0, right? That action was a responsible action, as I say, on the part of the company, and told them, please use us, take the money out, because we are aware that we have a vulnerability, okay? The winding road, but not at all easy to get back to a 50-something million dollar environment. Well, you can imagine how hard it was for this team to get back on its feet, right? To get back on its feet, to get back to having users and having deposits of 50-something million dollars. But unfortunately, they were hacked, okay? Which is the exploit we're going to look at today. Disclaimer, it wasn't me, and disclaimer, I'm not inviting you to apply this knowledge to the evil side, okay? Side of evil, okay? What is this Kyberswap? Because maybe many of you, since you don't work in the blockchain world, you don't know it. Well, despite having 50 or $100 million in deposits, it would have to be a big company, right? That everybody knows about. Well, no, in blockchain, there are a lot of companies that are very unknown, by people who are not professionally dedicated to it, and therefore a brief introduction. Kyberswap is dedicated to the swap sector, right? Currency swaps, right? Taking advantage of something called customized liquidity positions, which we're going to have to go into detail now so that you understand the hack. And it offers an additional added value over other platforms like Uniswap, which is auto-compounding, okay? Which is the possibility that your returns are continuously reinvested. Well, so we're going to have to gut DeFi, and we're going to learn about DeFi. I'm going to try to do a very quick recap, okay, because we have to look at the exploit. Liquidity in blockchain in a swapping company, okay? What you have typically are pools, liquidity pools. In those pools, you put a minimum of 2 tokens, okay? Which is one digital asset or the other, because you're going to swap one for the other, right? There are pools of more tokens, okay? But let's focus on one of 2 tokens. If we are going to exchange, for example, DAI, which is the equivalent to the dollar, and USDC, which is the equivalent to the dollar, but they are 2 different assets that are more or less associated to the dollar. But with certain oscillations, we are going to see that 99.5% of the time it will oscillate between 0.99 and $1.01, okay? But what happened in Uniswap version 2, which was the origin, the precursor of all this, that when somebody deposited liquidity, okay? Because what I am saying is that the good thing about decentralized finance is that any of us can deposit liquidity there, okay? And we can take the return on that liquidity, okay? Either you deposit money in a bank and the banks are not going to find you, or even though more and more of them do, they get the return, okay? From your money, and they even charge you commissions. Well, what these pools did was you deposited liquidity, and you had to allow that if the price went down a lot, the price goes up and down depending on the number of tokens there are of one or the other, right? If there are very few of one asset and many of others, in the end, well, let's say that each one of these that are much less is worth more, right? In other words, the less there are of an amount, one wants to get rid of these, but there are few of them. So let's say that the price fluctuates, right? What happens? That in the pools in the past, in version 2, in the past is a year and a bit ago. In the past, what was distributed, we tried to reserve that there should be from 0 to infinity in all the price positions, right? That there was liquidity available, right? But that's very inefficient, because if really all the swaps are going to be done in the same place, it doesn't make sense to have liquidity sitting there just in case it gets to be worth $0.50. Right, that's the change. So they invented concentrated liquidity, okay? The possibility of having each one of us being able to deposit liquidity and take fees, okay? Which are commissions, but we decide where we concentrate our liquidity, okay? So, well, what happened was that different people could put liquidity there and be liquidity providers and take commissions, as I said, for them. And there could be a situation like this, right? That there was someone who had deposited his liquidity position in a wider range, right? Just in case the price swung more one way or the other. If the price oscillated a lot for this place, there was going to be very little liquidity, right? So a single swap, because there is so little liquidity, is going to change the price very quickly. When we have, for example, the price almost always in a situation where there are many liquidity providers putting liquidity in a very more or less in the same environment, as you can see in the middle, there are several positions. There a strong change of one token for another is going to make the price move little, okay? Because there is enough liquidity. If there is almost no liquidity, well, what the founding inventor of Uniswap used to say, which is Hayden, said that this is a dark forest in crypto. In other words, the management of this concentrated liquidity and how prices are going to go up and down with all the ease and flexibility to each one of us as liquidity providers, LP, okay? They are liquidity providers, it's the dark forest, okay? They spend millions and millions of dollars auditing and reviewing all this kind of stuff. Well, because there's open source software, so in the end, Elastic also used some of it of Uniswap. Now, what are ticks? Ticks are spaces in which our liquidity is going to be distributed, because at the end we are going to allow the liquidity provider to put liquidity in a specific piece and not in another one, right? So those are called ticks, those spaces. The spaces are more or less equivalent to 0.01% of modification and variability of the price, okay, of the token. And what happens? which is a very important issue, is that when there is a swap of one token for another and we have to go through different liquidity ticks, well, what always has to happen is that first we exhaust the liquidity of that tick, right? Then we update the liquidity. That is, we have already exhausted all this liquidity, okay? We exchange one token for another. The price is going to go down, for example, or it's going to go up. We get to a tick, and in that tick something happens, okay? What happens? Well, we say, hey, that dormant liquidity that is only available from that price, from that tick, okay? We have to activate them, okay? In a virtual liquidity, because at the end you have the liquidity, that is, you have all the tokens in there, but they are not all available at all times. They are available based on the tick, where each one of us, as liquidity providers, have decided that our money is going to be used only for lending in a range, right? For example, if we do a swap, okay, from one token to another, so what we're going to do is we're going to switch from a take, right? Because we are borrowing over 300 of liquidity. So we need to take liquidity in the next TIC, okay? So the swap that we are going to do, we'll have to go from tick 200 to 300. We will have to go to 300 plus. Of course, there is much more liquidity in the 300 and something, right? So a modification, the price modification within that tick is not going to be so high because there is a lot of liquidity and we can make changes from one currency to another one. For another currency, okay? This is important, I'm going to repeat this throughout the talk so that you understand the change of tick, okay? We should never go through a tick, okay, without activating dormant liquidity or deactivating, okay? That's what I think you'll take away from this. Okay, to explain this hack, I finally got around to drawing it because I know it's complicated. And so what I want to represent on the right in these charts is precisely these two tokens, right? If I have two tokens in a pool, and I want to change token 0, right? And I have token 1, okay? The 0 token is there on the right, and I've got initially more, okay, in the pool, but I want to buy, okay? I want to give tokens 1. I put tokens 1 in the pool, okay? Because I want to exchange those tokens 1, then the token 1 increases in terms of what the pool has. The pool is going to have more because I am going to give more tokens 1. And what I want is 0 tokens. So the price representation is the price of the 0 token, okay? The 0 token is going to go up, okay? The 0 token is going to go up because I'm going to want 0 tokens and there's going to be less left in the pool. So what's going on? There are different liquidity providers putting different liquidity in there, and I can't use the liquidity on the right because there is enough liquidity inside the TIC where I am, okay? To make that currency exchange. So in this case, the price goes up. Yes, but I don't have to do anything in the Tiki because I am inside the TC itself. There is enough liquidity, I don't have to move from Tiki. What happens if there is not enough liquidity? I have to switch from TIC and I have to activate other liquidity providers' liquidity. And in this case, the change I have made yesterday, the swap, I have represented that I still want more 0 tokens, right? I've made a stronger swap. So what's going on here? Well, the key thing is that when I switch ICT, a function is executed, right? Which is the update liquidity and cross ticks, which has to take into account all of that I've told you. How is it going to activate available liquidity that is dormant because the price is at a certain point, okay? The question that everybody has been asking is, what about the TIC limits? If I'm going to play around there a little bit, what precision? Because you know that in blockchain, the precision that we use is 18 decimal places. Well, effectively, that's the key to this hack. It's a very sophisticated attack, right? It's going to try to go to the extremes, okay? The attacker deployed smart contracts on different networks, and on each network he exploited, and in each transaction he exploited several pools, and did multiple transactions to exploit multiple pools. And this he replicated it on different networks. What he did was, he went to the extreme place where there was no liquidity or where there was very little liquidity to be able to get there. Imagine the amount of tokens you have to dispose of, but that's okay, as I told last year's talk here. There are flash loans. Flash loans is having as much firepower as you want on the condition that you pay it back in the same transaction. Any person, any one of us can borrow $500 million, use it to do evil and then pay back the 500 million plus a fee, which is maybe 1,000 tokens plus, 1,000 tokens more, or $1,000 more, because there are flash loan providers and that's legal. It is used for trading or whatever, but here it's used a lot for evil as well. So what I'm going to do is go to the extreme where there's almost no liquidity, so that I'm the only liquidity provider. And in fact, we are going to see that you are going to go to the extreme, and he's going to create liquidity, and he's going to make some liquidity adjustments so that he's going to be the sole liquidity, as the sole liquidity provider. And he's going to go to the extreme, and to go to the extreme, imagine he has to change all the tokens that are in that pool, all of them. He has to trade tokens 1 for token 0, but tokens 1, he has to give the pool a lot of tokens. Give the pool a bunch of tokens in order to get there, because it's going to take almost all the 0 tokens that are left in the pool. Let's go step by step. Here there is a series of functions that is going to be compute swap step, which in each swap it is going to do a series of calculations, and it is going to compute the liquidity, what is the delta, what is the quadratic price, which is the SQRTP. For efficiency reasons, we work with the quadratic prices. Then the formulas are taught, but it's crazy. But in principle, keep this with compute swap step, and then that, and here is another key point. When I see an unequal, I shudder, because if it is unequal to 18 decimal places, it's very likely that you can play around with things there and make it unequal so that these functions are executed or not executed. I'm going to break down one of the attacks. Keep in mind that it did it on one of the pools. He did this on many pools and then replicated it on several networks simultaneously. The first thing he does is make a swap, as I said, a strong swap. A swap in which he takes a flash loan, he deposits lots and lots of tokens, 1, to take a lot of 0 tokens, almost all the 0 tokens in the pool. And so it passes a lot of ticks. And it's running the liquidity update effectively as planned. And it's going to go completely to the extreme. It is important for you to know that when managing a pool, these changes of ticks will always have a calculation with 18 decimal places of the current price. The current price, the target price, which is the target. And the next price. Normally when there is a tick change, the target SQL should match the next SQL. And let's see here what happened. First it does a swap. It's already gone to the bottom. It's done a swap. Look here, here's a screenshot. Notice how many times the compute swap steps are executed. It is executed many, many times. If you debug the transaction, the good thing about blockchain is that it is public and everybody can see it. I would like to see all the transactions that are made with my tax money, but I don't know what is done with that money. But here I can see absolutely everything, and so can you. You can see absolutely everything with the maximum precision of decimals, and you can see that here it has worked as expected. One compute swap step after another has been done. Here's a key point now. It's gone to the extreme. We're at tick 305,000. At that tick, it does magic. There what it does is, and it's all as part of the transaction. In the transaction itself, it does those calculations. It pulls out a statement of exactly what the liquidity of the statement is, because there's one thing which is the tokens that are available, and another thing is the liquidity that's available. Since there is a precision of 18 decimal places, it has to do the calculations, and what it is going to do is to add the liquidity. At that point, it is going to add liquidity. It is going to see exactly what the state is with a get liquidity state. And it is going to do a mint, that is, it is going to add liquidity L, an adjusted liquidity that it is going to have to readjust to stay as the only liquidity provider. It's going to add some liquidity first. It's going to make a calculation. It is going to make a get pool state again, and then it is going to take out a little bit of liquidity, just enough to stay at that point. Preparing the next stage. The next stage, I can tell you in advance that it is going to the other end of the tick. It created liquidity. Notice that I told you here that we were in the TC tick of 305,000. And in theory, there was no liquidity there. He had to create liquidity. Well, he or she, he has had to create liquidity, which is added from 305,000 to 305,408. There he has added his own liquidity. He adds, adjusts, calculates, and takes away a little bit. And then at the end, the result is that it has a higher liquidity, which is available in theory to any user, but he is doing it all during the same transaction, so he is going to take advantage of that situation. An important issue is reinvest L. Remember I told you at the beginning that Elastic, who had used Elastic, had a value proposition against its competitors. Against its competitors, it had an auto-compounding yield, which was the possibility of reinvesting everything it was earning. Well, in this case, the reinvest L will represent the liquidity that is reinvested, which is not modified, because it is only modified based on the time it is investing in that pool. Once we have control of liquidity at that point, notice that we can see all this at the end in the mint has. I'm going to put it right between those two ticks, and I'm going to add that liquidity, what is my desired amount, etc. And then I calculate what's left, and I'm going to add that liquidity. Calculate what's left, and I'm going to make a remove liquidity. I'm going to remove a little bit of liquidity. And now here's the key. The key here is once you have the exact attack set up, you're going to do a new swap. He's going to go back to the right. That is, he's going to take back 0 tokens. He has added liquidity, and he has added it, he has withdrawn it, but now he is going to make a swap to the right again, i.e., he is going to take back what he has added. But he's going to do it with spectacular precision. The precision is, as I said, a precision of 18 decimal places. And at this point, he is at 305, the current scrub, which is the price at which he is at that moment. He is at that tick, added that liquidity that is shaded in red, and he's going to make a right swap that's going to take him to the next tick. That calculation, the calculation of the price at tick 305408 is the one that puts target. But notice that the next currency is different. It is a little bit higher, just a little bit higher. What happens when a compute swap step is done? When you make a compute swap step, you look at exactly that jump that you are going to make, whether there is enough liquidity or not inside the tick, and if you are going to change tick. And for that, there is a thing called the reach amount. The reach amount is how much token swaps. I can swap without going over tick. He calculated, that's why he did the preparation earlier, he calculated that if he swapped 244, what's there, the reach amount? Okay, 2440080, I don't know what. He ended up at 6000000000000. If he went over that point made him change tick. So he made a swap of that -1 unit with an accuracy of 18 decimal places. And launched the swap with all of that but one less. Okay, 999999999. In making that swap of exactly those tokens, it didn't go over tick according to the system's system calculations, because the target SQRTP was that of the tick. But realize with all those unequal that if he did that, was going to get an inequality between the target SQRTP and the next SQRTP, so that there was an inequality. It was not going to do an update liquidity and cross-tick. That function was not executed. It did everything to put itself at a point at the end where the target of the next was unequal, but the update liquidity and cross-tick was not executed. And it calculated exactly all during the transaction. By doing that, what do you get? By doing that, you see here the rich amount as part of the calculation that's done in the compute swap step. So he saw that that was the maximum and took that -1. Okay. And saw that the ticket that it was supposed to be on was the 408. But there was a mismatch. So what did he do at that point? At that point, once it was already there, the system was not working as expected. The system had not executed a tick change when really, for all intents and purposes, if I made a last change on stage 4, that is, I now made a tick again, but in this case to the other side. What it did was the system, at the time of starting each compute swap step, what the system estimates is that for all intents and purposes now the swap is going that way. For this purpose, the current SQRTP was not that of the target. It was of the next tick. In other words, in the previous swap, the system understood that there was no change of tick, but in this new swap it was understanding that there had been a tick. It had changed the tick because the price it was taking due to that precision error started in the green zone, and there should not be any liquidity there because he did not add liquidity there. There was no liquidity there. But let's see that the system thought that his current tick was this. And since there had been no liquidity update, he did have a base liquidity and a reinvested liquidity. He here followed the liquidity that was in the other place, but that liquidity is from this. It is not this liquidity. So this swap step exploded, it doubled the liquidity. Why? Because to all intents and purposes, the swap step was made, now yes, on the understanding that you were in another tick. And so the swap to the other side, what does it do? It does a compute swap step. It takes the liquidity, it spends it. Where it was not the same as on the other side, it spends it. And it reaches this tick and arrives at this tick. It makes another compute swap step. It makes the update liquidity and cross tick. It activates the dormant liquidity, which it never deactivated. So we have doubled the liquidity. We did not deactivate this liquidity when we left here because we thought that we had not left here. And now that we are here, we think that we do have the liquidity, that we should not have anything because this is the liquidity that we are adding. And by crossing, we activate the liquidity that we know was here, so we make a swap to the other side in a big way in order to take everything that you wanted to take. And so now what happens in the pool is the other way around. Now, we deposited 0 tokens, which were not the ones that we wanted to steal, but we wanted to take token 1. This, for all intents and purposes, we see that when we start this last swap, and as I say, part of the whole transaction itself, first you see where we are, what is the initial part before we do the compute swap step. And in the initial part, it says that we are in that tick, that we have liquidity, which is what we have seen. And then we do the swap step, etc. And what are we going to do? Now we execute the liquidity update, because now we are going to change from where we should not be to where we want to be, and we are already doing the liquidity update. So we have doubled the liquidity. The sophistication is because the check failed because of a super small part of accuracy. In blockchain, we use 18 decimal places of precision, but this is not always good. But this is déjà vu. Why? Because in April of the same year, $1 million was paid to a white hat. Precisely because of the double liquidity and proof of concept, a unit test, which is where I'm going to go into this a little bit. A unitary test. To first identify what could be stolen, that the economic damage was 82% of that pool. It could drain up to 80% of that pool, which is what has happened in all these pools. With the write-up solution, and with the logic explained, well, an exploiter has used it, but how did he exploit it? If this was validated by a white hat, which was also paid, as I say, for the vulnerability, and then super reference blockchain security auditing companies Why has something similar been exploited? Here there was no check. And another check was added, and the check was another unequal one. As I say, it makes my hair stand on end about the unequals. What happened? What happened is that you can't test in a concrete block with a concrete situation. When you have an additional functionality that you do not have enough control over, such as the auto-compounding yield. Indeed, the system worked fine. After making that fix for that specific case, with the situation of that pool in that block, as the reinvest L was, which is the auto-compounding, the calculations that were made in the forensic, it was detected that obviously if I did not use the reinvest L, it all added up in the TC. This is from another pool in the TC, so and so, so and so, so and so. The reach amount, the use amount, obviously was lower or maximum equal. But the problem is that it was being used in the calculation, in parts of the code, in the recalculation that's being done in each compute swap step. The system is using the compounding yield. You have added this here in your calculation with respect to Uniswap. Uniswap leaves the yields aside. It does not estimate them as you are. But this is your value proposition. You have said that you are going to do auto-compounding, that your liquidity is going to be automatically reinvested already. But then what you have to do is to be very careful, because it is going to vary significantly depending on time and depending on, therefore, what was shown is that obviously if you didn't use this reinvest L, all those millions of dollars that Uniswap had invested exactly worked. And they were squared to 18 decimal places. But the moment you introduce this new variable, you've modified somebody's source code and you've put a service, and there's $100 million of users or $50 million of users. And you can't just rely on that unit test or that white hat validation, but it doesn't end there. In fact, the exploiter only took 48 million alone, effectively, but in blockchain, this is also the dark forest. Why? Because there are a lot of bots listening, and some can do you. There's everything, right? There are mimic bots, that is, they copy what you do and that's it. And others are the front-running bots, which are the ones that are listening. They see your transaction in the pool, and they say, wait, I will execute it. They put more gas, and they execute it. They simply change the address that will receive the money and will make the flash loan for theirs, right? With this, we were able to have a series of conversations and reach an agreement so that they would only keep 10% of what they had. They had stolen. And it doesn't end there. I mean, the exploiter, when he finished the hack, he sent this message to Kyberswap through the blockchain and said, when he's rested, we'll start negotiate, okay? And here he was told, you get 10%, which is kind of the standard, not the 1% that they gave to the white hat. Let's see if we learn to pay things as they are. But well, in any case, if they had given him 10%, as we saw later, the validation that was made of the fix was not correct. And he gives him a series of data, but this started to get complicated because he ended up answering, hey, look, you are threatening me. I wanted to negotiate, but you are threatening me. All this is public. It is in the blockchain. You can see it in the transaction, but you are threatening me. You are giving me deadlines and things that I do not think are correct, so I will send you a plan, okay? On the 30th day at such and such time, because I am noticing hostility, okay? Here at the thing. And as it is yesterday, I haven't looked at it today, but still yesterday, this was the last thing. I mean, the plan that the exploiter passed is like, hey, I'm going to take control of the company. I'm going to have full authority, the executives, or I'm going to buy the company from a... I mean, here, for those of you in attribution, there's a lot here, right? There is a lot of very useful information here, isn't there? Well, no, it's not worth a particular block and for a particular pool. In blockchain, we use a lot of invariants, which we call, and what we call formal verification. It is being used a lot here, right? There are mathematical experts working a lot on fuzzing, but in the formal verification version, and this you have to do a battle test. That is, you can't re-inject liquidity in environments well, that are not so clear. Really, whether the fix is sufficient or not, right? So, well, I think I've gone a little fast, but I know it's complex, okay? I have tried to explain you some researches that take many hours. I hope you have understood something. In any case, you can ask me any questions, but, well, above all, going back to the objectives I had at the beginning, I wanted you to understand that being multidisciplinary in this case matters. The sophistication that you understand, that it must be not only in the attackers are sophisticated, you have to defend in a sophisticated way. And, well, that there is a great job opportunity, because as you can see, there are very few of us who are doing this, and the risk is very high. And nothing, as always, I end with this phrase, which is that the earth has music for those who listen. And nothing. If you have any questions, thank you very much.
Any questions? Any questions? Hello, hello, questions? Now we have a little break, and at 12 o'clock, whoever wants to come back is invited to come back. Okay, the block is coming up, one of the important blocks. Any questions? No questions?
I don't want stickers.
You don't want blockchain money or anything? No, nothing? So come on, we'll be back at 12 o'clock. You have merchandise here, and please come, okay? There are some interesting talks later. Thank you.